I turned 68 in February, and my son gave me a fountain pen. Not a tablet, not a phone, a fountain pen, because he knows I still write letters by hand. That's the kind of man my son is. My daughter-in-law gave me a card with a gift card tucked inside, a Tim Hortons one, $50, because she remembered I'd mentioned stopping there every morning before my walks. Small things, thoughtful things. My daughter gave me nothing that year. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it matters later. Her name is Simone. She's 41 years old. She lives 40 minutes south of me, in Guelph, though we might as well have lived in separate countries for how often we spoke. After her mother passed, that was 3 years ago now, January, a Tuesday, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache, Simone and I drifted in the way that people do when the person holding them together is suddenly gone. Her mother was the one who called. Her mother was the one who remembered birthdays and made sure we all sat at the same table at Christmas. Without her, Simone and I were two people who loved the same woman and didn't quite know what to do with each other. I live alone in the house we bought together in 1987. It's a red brick semi-detached in Waterloo, Ontario. Nothing grand, but ours. The backyard still has the garden my wife planted the summer before she got sick. I haven't touched it. I keep meaning to. But every spring I look at it and think, not yet. Maybe next year. My son Garrett lives in Hamilton with his wife and their 2 kids. He checks on me. He calls on Sundays. He's not perfect. No one is, but he shows up. That matters more than people realize until they're old enough to count who shows up. So, my 68th birthday. Simone called the morning of, which surprised me. We talked for maybe 12 minutes. She asked if I was doing anything special. I said Garrett was coming for dinner. She said that was nice. There was a pause that stretched a little too long, and then she said, "Dad, I want to come by next week. I have something for you. A late gift." I said, "Of course." She came on a Wednesday. She had a box with her, a tablet, one of the mid-range ones, already set up, already charged. She said she'd noticed I was having trouble reading small print on my phone and that this would be easier. She showed me how to make the text larger. She showed me the email app. She showed me how to video call. She was patient, warmer than she'd been in months. I remember thinking, maybe we're finding our way back to each other. Maybe this is the beginning of something. She left after 2 hours. She hugged me at the door. A real hug, not the shoulder pat kind. I stood in the hallway after she left and held the tablet and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hopeful. I am not a technology person. I want to be clear about that. I spent 30 years as a land surveyor for the region of Waterloo. I can read a topographic map better than most people can read a menu. But smartphones, tablets, apps, these things came late in my life and I've never been comfortable with them. My wife handled all of it. She paid the bills online, she set up the email, she knew which button to press when the television did something strange. After she died, I was embarrassed to ask for help with these things. I'd call Garrett sometimes, but I felt foolish. A man my age, not knowing how to attach a photo to an email. It sounds small. It doesn't feel small when you're standing in your kitchen at 11 at night trying to figure out why the screen went dark. So when Simone set up the tablet and showed me around it, I was genuinely grateful. And I used it. I watched videos on it in the evenings. I started video calling Garrett's kids on Sunday mornings instead of just talking to Garrett. My granddaughter, who was 9, taught me how to use the drawing app. We drew pictures of dogs together. Bad pictures. Wonderful pictures. I had the tablet for about 3 weeks before I noticed something strange. I'd been trying to find a photo I'd taken, a picture of the backyard, the garden, mid-July, the way the light comes through the oak tree in the late afternoon. I'd taken it on the tablet, and I wanted to email it to Garrett. But when I went looking through the settings, the way my granddaughter had shown me, I found something I didn't recognize. There was a folder, not in the photo gallery, somewhere deeper, in a part of the settings I hadn't gone into before. I don't know what made me click on it. Curiosity, maybe, or something instinctual, the kind of low-level unease that you can't explain, but that a person learns to trust when they've been alive long enough. I couldn't make sense of what I was looking at. There were names I didn't recognize, a list of permissions, something that looked like an access log, dates and times, going back to the day Simone set up the tablet. I sat with it for a long time. Then I called Garrett. Garrett drove up from Hamilton on a Saturday morning. He brought his older one, my grandson Oliver, who is 14 and already knows more about computers than anyone should at that age. Oliver is quiet in the way that serious people are quiet. He listens more than he talks, and when he does talk, you'd better pay attention. I handed Oliver the tablet without saying much, just told him I'd found something I didn't understand and asked him to take a look. He sat at the kitchen table. Garrett made coffee. I stood by the window and watched the backyard and tried to keep my breathing even. Oliver was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Grandpa." Just that, just my name, but the way he said it. I turned around. His face was careful in the way that young people's faces get when they're trying to protect you from something. He looked at his father. Then back at me. "There's monitoring software on here," he said. "It's not something that comes standard. Someone installed it." I said, "What does it do?" He set the tablet down on the table, very gently as though it might bite. "It can read your messages. It can access your email. It can," he paused, "it can track what you're looking at, account numbers, passwords, if you'd logged into your bank on here." "I hadn't," I said. He let out a breath. Garrett put down his coffee mug. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. I sat down at the table. There was a long silence in my kitchen, the kind of silence that changes the shape of a room. Finally I said, "She set it up. Simone set up the whole thing before she gave it to me." Nobody argued with that. I want to be honest about what I felt in the days that followed, because I think it matters. The first thing I felt was not anger. The first thing was something closer to vertigo, that physical sensation of the floor tilting, the way everything you thought you understood about a moment turns out to have been wrong. That hug at the door, that warmth, that hope. I had stood in my own hallway feeling hopeful, holding a device that was designed to rob me. The second thing I felt was grief. And I recognize that might sound strange. Shouldn't I have been furious? Maybe. But my wife had just been gone for 3 years, and Simone is her daughter as much as mine. And when I thought about what was happening, I kept thinking about my wife and what it would have done to her to know this. That grief sat on top of everything else and made it heavier. The third thing, and this came slowly over several days, was something colder and quieter, a kind of resolve. I am not a man who loses things without knowing where they went. Garrett wanted to go to the police immediately. I asked him to wait. Not long, a week, maybe 2. I needed to understand what we were dealing with before we did anything. He didn't like it, but he trusted me. That's what 30 years of being someone's father buys you. I started going through my papers, not all at once. I'm organized, always have been, comes with the job, but methodically the way I used to survey a site before putting a single stake in the ground. I went through the filing cabinet in the study. I went through the accordion folder my wife kept her documents in, which I'd never touched since she passed. That was where I found it. It was tucked between 2 folders of old insurance documents, a manila envelope with my name on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a set of papers, 4 pages, single-spaced, with some sections highlighted in yellow. It took me most of an evening to understand what I was reading. I'm not a lawyer, but I've signed enough documents in my professional life to know what a power of attorney looks like. This was a draft, not signed, not witnessed, not notarized, but it was a draft of an enduring power of attorney, the kind that gives someone else control over your financial decisions, your property, everything, made out in Simone's name, granting her full authority over my affairs on the grounds that I'd been assessed and found to have diminished capacity to manage financial matters independently. There was a sticky note attached to the back page in the same unfamiliar handwriting. It said, "Need signature before March. Use tablet to establish pattern first." I sat at the kitchen table with those 4 pages in front of me for a very long time. Use the tablet to establish pattern first. I understood then what the software was for. Not just access to my accounts, something more deliberate than that. Documentation. A record of confusion, of errors, of a man struggling with technology, of someone who couldn't navigate a simple device without help. Evidence built over weeks to support a claim that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. A manufactured incompetence. I thought about the 12-minute phone call on my birthday. I thought about how she'd asked if I was doing okay and whether the day-to-day stuff was still manageable. Small questions, the kind of questions that don't feel like anything at the time. I thought about how she'd insisted on setting up the tablet herself, how she'd watched me try to use the email app and said gently, "Don't worry, Dad, it takes time." Building a record, right there in my living room, with my coffee going cold on the end table and the news on in the background. I put the papers back in the envelope. I put the envelope back where I'd found it. Then I called Garrett and asked him to come up again, and this time I asked him to bring Oliver. Here is what we did. Oliver confirmed that the monitoring software was still active. As long as I was using the tablet on my home Wi-Fi, Simone could see everything. That worked in our favor. We talked it through carefully, the 3 of us, at my kitchen table. Garrett wanted to go straight to the police again. I said, not yet. I wanted to understand the full scope first. And I wanted to do this right, because if we moved too soon, without solid documentation on our side, it was going to be my word against my daughter's, and a good lawyer could make a confused old man out of anyone. Over the following 2 weeks, I used the tablet every single day. I was careful. I didn't log into my bank. I didn't enter any passwords. But I used the email. I used the browser. I looked at nothing that could hurt me. What I did do, I called my bank directly from my landline and put new security protocols on every account, new passwords, a callback verification system, a note on my file. I asked them to record it, that any changes to beneficiaries, account holders, or withdrawal limits required my in-person appearance and 2 pieces of ID. The woman I spoke to at the branch when I explained the situation briefly was very kind. She said they saw this more than people realized. I called a lawyer, a real one. I looked up the Law Society of Ontario Referral Service and asked specifically for someone with experience in elder law. His name was Raymond, and he was about 40, calm and precise, and he listened to everything I said without interrupting. He told me that what I was describing, the monitoring software combined with the power of attorney draft and the notation about establishing a pattern, constituted a serious matter, potentially criminal. He asked me if I wanted to proceed. I said yes. He said, "Before we do anything else, I want you to photograph those documents, every page, front and back. Then give me the originals." I did exactly that. Raymond contacted the Waterloo Regional Police, not to file a complaint yet, to have a preliminary conversation with a financial crimes officer. I didn't go with him to that meeting. He reported back to me the same evening. They took it seriously. I kept using the tablet. I'm not proud of the performance, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I wanted Simone to see what she expected to see, an aging man, a little confused, taking his time with things, asking Garrett for help occasionally, nothing alarming, nothing that would spook her. I even called her once, on a Sunday afternoon, using the tablet's video call function. She picked up quickly. She was cheerful. She asked how I was getting on with the device. I said it was still a bit confusing, but I was managing. I said the text size feature she'd shown me was a big help. She smiled. I smiled back. I thought about the sticky note. Needs signature before March. It was mid-February. She called me on a Thursday and said she'd like to bring someone by. A friend of hers, she said. Someone who worked in estate planning, who could help me think through my financial affairs now that I was getting older and living alone. She said it casually, the way you'd mention picking up groceries. She said it would be good for me to have a plan in place. I said that sounded fine. I said Saturday would work. I called Raymond that night. He made 2 calls of his own. Saturday morning, Garrett arrived early. He parked down the street. Oliver wasn't with him this time. Simone arrived at 11 with a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, a briefcase, a firm handshake, a card that identified him as a financial and estate planning consultant. Not a lawyer, not a notary, a consultant. I made tea. We sat in the living room. The man opened his briefcase and took out a folder. Inside the folder were forms. Some of them looked official. Some of them, I noticed, had blank signature lines at the bottom with small handwritten X's indicating where to sign. I let him talk for about 15 minutes. Simone sat on the couch and watched me with an expression I can only describe as focused, the way you watch a door you're waiting to open. Then I said, I'd like to call my son before I sign anything. Simone's expression shifted. I picked up the landline, not the tablet, and called Garrett's cell. He was already walking up the front path. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. What happened next took less than an hour. Garrett came in. He was calm, calmer than I expected given everything. He introduced himself to the consultant and asked, very politely, to see his credentials. The man produced a business card and some printed materials. Garrett took photographs of everything on his phone. Then Garrett said to Simone quietly, "We know about the tablet." The room went very still. I watched my daughter's face. I had wondered in the weeks beforehand what I would feel when this moment came. Vindication, maybe. Anger, finally arriving. Something sharp and righteous. What I felt was tired. Not defeated. Just tired. The specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has finally set it down, even though setting it down doesn't make the carrying unhappen. Simone started to speak. I held up my hand. "Don't," I said. "Not right now, not in front of strangers." The consultant gathered his folder and left quickly. I didn't stop him. Raymond had already told me that the man was known to him. Not illegal to be a consultant, he'd said, but the forms in that folder were another matter. The police came that afternoon. I won't describe that part in detail. It's not mine to describe, not entirely. It belongs to Simone too, and whatever she is to me, she is still my daughter and her mother's child, and I won't make a spectacle of the worst hour of her life. What I'll say is this: the financial crimes officer was professional and thorough. The monitoring software on the tablet, the power of attorney draft, the notation about establishing a pattern, the forms the consultant had brought together, they painted a picture that was hard to explain away. Simone was not arrested that day, but she was formally interviewed. Charges were laid several weeks later, fraud-related, the details of which Raymond helped me understand in his careful, precise way. The process was slow and procedural, and nothing like what you see on television. In the months that followed, I did several things. I updated my will through Raymond's office properly with full legal witnesses, everything above board. I named Garrett as executor. I put in place a genuine power of attorney, signed and notarized, with Garrett and a trusted family friend as joint attorneys, with specific provisions about when it could be invoked and under what circumstances. I called my bank again and sat down with them in person. The protocols I'd put in place earlier became permanent. The woman I'd spoken to on the phone turned out to be the branch manager, and she walked me through every account, every beneficiary designation, every automatic withdrawal. I left that meeting feeling, for the first time in years, like I actually understood my own financial life. I started attending a monthly group at the Waterloo Public Library, a seniors technology session, free, run by a young woman from the University of Waterloo. I was the oldest person in the first session I attended. By the third session, I'd brought 2 neighbors. I'm not embarrassed about not knowing things anymore. That embarrassment nearly cost me everything. I still have the tablet. I keep it in the study. I haven't used it since February, but I haven't thrown it out either. I'm not sure why. Maybe because throwing it out would feel like it had more power over me than it deserves. People ask me sometimes, Garrett asks, my neighbors ask, the people I've told this story to, whether I've spoken to Simone. Yes, once briefly through lawyers. Do I think she's a bad person? That's harder. I think she was desperate in a way I didn't see and probably should have. I think she made a calculation about me, about who I had become without her mother, about how alone I was, about how far a man can drift before he stops noticing the current. And I think she was wrong. About all of it. I am not a man who drifts. I spent 30 years taking precise measurements of the earth so that other people could build things on solid ground. I know where I stand. I have always known where I stand. My wife knew that about me. That is one of the things I miss most, being known. I think about her often. I thought about her all through this, during the long nights when I was going through the papers, during the Saturday morning when I sat in my living room and watched my daughter's face when Garrett walked through the door. She would have been devastated, and then she would have been furious, and then, because this is who she was, she would have sat me down and said, "What are you going to do next?" That is what I try to ask myself, still. What next? The backyard garden is coming back, a little. I didn't plant it. I think the seeds from previous years are just finding their way up on their own, the way things do when you leave them alone long enough. There are some yellow flowers along the back fence that I don't recognize. I'll have to look them up. She would have known what they were. She knew the name of every plant she ever put in the ground. But I'm learning. I keep coming back to that sticky note. 8 words. Need signature before March. Use tablet to establish pattern first. Someone planned this carefully. Someone who had sat at my kitchen table, who had eaten my wife's cooking, who had called me dad her whole life, sat down somewhere and wrote those 8 words and thought they made sense. That's the thing that stays with me, not the betrayal itself as much as the planning, the patience of it. The months of letting distance grow between us after her mother passed, and then the careful warmth of that Wednesday visit, the hug at the door, the gentleness about the text size on the screen, all of it constructed, all of it aimed. What I've come to understand is that none of it worked, not because I was lucky, and not because someone swooped in to save me, but because of choices made long before any of this happened. Garrett calls on Sundays because I raised him to show up. Oliver knows what monitoring software looks like because his curiosity was never discouraged. I had a lawyer's number within 2 days because I had spent 30 years learning that you don't put a stake in the ground until you understand the terrain. These things weren't accidents. They were the accumulated result of how we'd all chosen to live. And the plan failed because of something even simpler than that. I paid attention. Not to anything dramatic. to a folder I didn't recognize in a place it shouldn't have been. That's all it took. One moment of not scrolling past the thing that felt slightly wrong. I think about the people who don't catch it, the ones who sign the papers because the room feels official and the person asking is someone they love and they're tired and they don't want to make things difficult. I was almost one of them. I would have been if I'd been a little more trusting, a little more eager for the warmth my daughter was offering after 3 years of distance. What I learned, what I carry now, is that doing right by the people in your life isn't just a moral position, it's a practical one. Garrett shows up because I showed up. Oliver thinks carefully because we taught him that thinking carefully matters. The branch manager extended genuine care because I treated her like a person, not a transaction. The rightness of how you live accumulates, quietly. And when something goes wrong, and something always eventually goes wrong, it's there. It holds. That's not sentiment. That's just what I observed from the inside in the middle of the worst months of my recent life. And the resolve, the willingness to sit with 4 pages of ugly truth and decide to do something about it, rather than fold the paper back up and pretend, that came from somewhere too. 30 years of precise work. 31 years of marriage to a woman who never once took the easier path when the right one was still available. You become who you practice being. I'm still practicing. The yellow flowers are still coming up along the back fence. I look them up. They're black-eyed Susans. My wife planted them in 2019, and I never noticed. They just kept coming back without any help from me. Some things, if you planted them right the first time, don't need you to do anything else. They just grow.